and wind is the same word for spirit in many languages. In Persian poetry, this word is nafas.
And Farid Mohammadi asked me to talk to Kelsey Erin Shipman about her work and why she's doing what she's doing. Hello, Kelsey.
Hi, Rick.
How you doing?
Thrilled. Happy to be here.
Okay, so yeah, I was very struck by especially that first poem that you did on Saturday a week ago. I guess it was a week ago.
Yeah.
And it did strike me as Whitman-esque. There was this generosity, this idea of bringing in all peoples and all points of view, as it were, in a very embracive kind of spirit. And I guess that's because in the little bio I read of you, you list yourself as poet and activist. So I'm assuming that's a leftist activism.
Yeah. I take that as a great compliment that you think my poem reminds you of Walt Whitman, because he's one of my favorite poets. Especially because he has such great compassion when he writes, you know, and I feel like his poetry is so deep and expands laterally and vertically at all times. And I find that really exciting. And I call myself an activist. I've done a lot of different kinds of activism. I worked in the labor movement for a while. I was a union organizer. I've done feminist organizing and a lot of anti-war work. And I feel like a lot of my poems are part of what I do as an activist, you know, because my poems are about struggles in the United States, you know, and topics such as slavery that people don't talk about. And for me, that's a really important legacy, because I come from a very old white Southern family, and our family owned slaves, and people don't like to talk about that. White people in this country don't like to talk about that. My family doesn't like to talk about that. It's a very sensitive and painful subject, but it's something that I feel is so crucial to moving beyond the racism, the inherent racism in this country, and especially in the South, and especially, you know, in my life, because we're all a party to that. And it takes a great amount of self-reflection and Whitman-like depth, I think, to admit that and to deal with that legacy.
So what state are you from?
I'm from Texas.
Ah, so you
Yeah.
Texas, and the cotton or cane or
My family was cattle ranchers.
cattle ranchers.
So we've lived here for over 5 generations. I've had people in Texas, and I've had people in the U.S. since the early 1600s.
Cattle slaves?
Well, cattle ranchers, ranch hands, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, my family's history goes from Delaware. Well, Scotch-Irish. My family is Scotch-Irish, and it goes through Delaware to Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. So we have found, my grandparents, thankfully, are very into genealogy, and they have found willing people who are slaves, willing people to each other. And I've been able to cull together 15 names of individuals that were owned by my family. That's one of the poems that I read, actually, at the AIPF last weekend, was about those 15 names and looking for reciprocity in calling them, you know, and dealing with that legacy.
Let's hear it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This is the poem I have not written, the legacy I cannot hold. This is a call to my slave family left in ancestral cold. Though no one wrote about you in my family's ghost book, I vow here and now to remember what they took. Your names, your children, your right to love whom you choose, your bodies, your nightmares, your battered muse, your comfort, your journey, your playful touch, your gods, your history, your sacred trust, milk from your breast, crops from your toil, pleasure from your pain, fruit from your soil. Rights to your harvest, records of your kin, space to speak with God. Promises of education. I have 15 names mentioned in passing by white men. I have 15 names and so much fear to utter them. Yes, this legacy of cruelty weighs heavy on my heart, And though I don't know how to make this right, I have only here to start. 15 names, 15 lives, 15 calls to persons past. I speak these words in reverence of all you have surpassed. Amy, Ned, Palace, Jim, Peter, Lucy, Sally, Dina, Joe, Harry, Kate, Pete, Seppus, James, and one nameless black female, age 10 in 1850. Oh, if I could rewrite history, I would place your footsteps next to mine. I would sing your forest songs as hymns to passing time. I would sit by your firelight, worshiping waterways. I would break apart boats and float on cresting waves. I would find all your children, greet them as siblings of heart. I would harness moonbeams and kindle your freedom route. I don't know if you would greet me as family or friend, but I stand now among your spirits, grappling with these sins. And this poem has no ending, no clever turn of phrase, for it seeks only truth and the warmth of sun rays. So cast your stones, cast your nets, cast your web of history's lies, 'cause I find solace in these sentences and strength in my brown eyes.
When did you write that?
I wrote that poem the first year I lived in New York. It was a poem that I think had been brewing for a very long time, but I finally sat down to write it in early 2008.
When did you find out about the 15?
Probably about 6 months before that. My grandparents have been into genealogy for a long time, and I had been wanting to ask them for months if they'd ever come across names of slaves. Because the more I learned about my family, the more I learned how old we were in terms of how long we'd been in this country, the more I realized that had to be a possibility. So it took me a while to summon the courage to ask that question to my grandmother. But luckily, she's a very wonderful and supportive person, and she sent it to me. So it was probably a few months before I actually sat down to write the poem.